Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm a millennial. I used to hate that term, millennial. It had a lot of negative connotations and would usually be used in a derogatory way alongside other words like snowflakes, and entitled, and avocado. I didn't really feel like millennial applied to me, which makes sense since being born in the mid-80s and being a 90s kid meant most of the media I grew up with were made by Generation X. I identified with the music, TV shows and pop culture of that generation, even singing along proudly to My Generation by Limp Bizkit, which, I'm not gonna lie, I still kinda do. But I'm not from Gen X, and while Gen X had a hand in forming my young mind, I am 100% a millennial. I quote The Simpsons far too much. I love memes and GIFs, and I use words like doggo. And now that I'm in my mid-30s, I have accepted that and embraced that, and I am proud to be a millennial. Too often though, we are the butt of the joke, the punching bag, and have wild claims levelled against us. We're often accused of being lazy, entitled, not willing to put the hard work in, that we're addicted to our smartphones and technology, that we're selfish moaners, whiners, or snowflakes. None of this is true, of course, us millennials already know this, and yet the accusations remain. And so long as they do, they actively belittle all the issues that millennials face every single day. So today I want to start a defence of us millennials. Over the course of the next few episodes of this mini-series, I want to explore why we are perceived in such ways, and try to break down those misconceptions about us, and maybe even give older generations some food for thought about the various issues facing us and why they affect us the way they do, and why it is vitally important that we all do what we can to right the ship and make things easier for future generations. Now, I'm from Ireland, so a lot of what I'm about to say will be framed by that upbringing. But I feel a lot of it will apply to the wider world as we are all facing similar issues with our own local flavours. And obviously, I can only speak from my own experiences, so there may well be millennials who disagree with what I say, and that's okay. Everyone has different experiences. It's what makes the world so interesting. But I am confident that a lot of my experiences will mirror those of a lot of my generation. I'm also quite confident that at times a lot of you will believe I am a rambling crazy woman. And that's okay too. I mean, I probably am. The first step is acceptance, right? So anyway, let's get to it, shall we? Whether it's housing, healthcare, or the widening wealth divide, our generation has it rough. Older generations would have you believe that we have nothing to complain about and are simply a generation of moaners. This couldn't be further from the truth. Sure, we have a lot of modern conveniences that older generations didn't, but are we truly better off? In a world where the prospect of owning your own home is drifting further out of reach for many, and where most of the world's problems are being blamed on you, do we really have it better? Does having a smartphone and access to all the information we could ever need really make our lives better? Or is it just one big distraction from the crushing realities that no matter how hard we work, we may never be able to buy our own home or have any real financial freedom? Does being able to take cheap foreign holidays really make up for a horrible and gouging rental market where a basic necessity is commercialised past the point of sustainability? Does the fabled avocado on toast really help us swallow the reality that many of us may not be able to have more than one child, or have a child at all? Yeah, didn't think so. In this series, I want to delve into some of the big issues facing our generation and ask why. Why are we blamed? Why are we mocked? And most importantly, why are we ignored and written off? So let's start this defence by talking about, in my opinion, the biggest issue facing millennials today: housing. Housing is one of the biggest issues facing society in general at the moment, but it's one that adversely affects millennials more than any other generation so far. Home ownership is something a huge portion of society aspires to. The idea of having a little slice of the world to call your own is hard to resist. A sanctuary, an escape, a home. Having a stable home is not just a simple want. It is one of the most basic necessities human beings have. It is a need. This need is even enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So housing is important. We can all agree on that. However, we seem unable to agree on how to handle it. Here in Ireland, we're in the midst of a disastrous housing supply and rental crisis. Rents are, quite frankly, extortionate. Supply is few and far between. And at the same time, house prices are rising and rising out of reach of the vast majority of ordinary people. So you can't afford to buy, but rents are also through the roof. Ireland has a unique relationship with the housing market. I don't want to dwell too much on this, as to be honest, I could do an entire series just on Ireland's mistakes when it comes to housing. But I do feel cliff notes are necessary here. Our economic booms and busts seem to follow the housing market. In the early 2000s, our housing market was booming, and so too did our economy. Credit was flowing, and the good times rolled. But unfortunately, far too much credit was flowing, and developers were given free rein to build whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted, and this allowed them to heat up the market to boiling point by upping the market rates as much as they could, while the credit followed suit. 100% mortgages were being given away like sweets on Halloween. We had the media and the government cheering the country on with tax breaks and incentives and property supplements in the national newspapers to beat the band. But of course, this was unsustainable. And the global financial crash of 2008 hit Ireland, and it hit it hard. And that financial crash and the years of austerity that have followed on from it hit just as the first batches of millennials left school to decide what they wanted to do with their lives. And this is where our story starts for millennials. When we were still in primary and secondary school, the world was settled and thriving. We were told that if we worked hard, we could get all the things our parents had and more. And yet, most of us entered into an adult life full of uncertainty and austerity. By 2008, the world was in financial freefall, and Ireland was truly one of the worst hit due to our reckless reliance on the property market. Now, I'm not going to downplay the disastrous effects this global recession had on older generations. I mean, again, I could do a whole series on the after effects of this crash and how it nearly destroyed our country, but it is important to understand the landscape waiting for the first adult millennials when they left either school or college. Fresh-faced graduates with hopes and dreams shattered before they were even able to fully develop, all because of the recklessness of those who came before us, all because of greed, and a good smattering of ego and pride too. Sure, we all partied, right? No, we didn't all party, but millennials were sure as hell left with the horrible and unearned hangover. Austerity left and right, jobs becoming harder to come by, emigration becoming the done thing just to survive. Not really a fun time to start your adult life, really, is it? It has taken a long time to begin to recover from the Great Recession of 2008, and truth be told, I don't think things are all that better for younger generations. Housing is still a basket case here in Ireland. We swung too far the other way, so now credit is like gold dust, unless, of course, you're earning big bucks. And property development has dwindled so much that the low supply has forced prices upwards. Our local county councils and city councils have long since stopped building social housing, and no developer or council is interested in building affordable housing. So the result is thousands of people who can't afford to keep a roof over their heads, whether that roof is bought or rented. And we're not the only country where rents are soaring and house prices are out of reach. It's happening the world over. Here in Ireland, we have allowed and encouraged real estate investment trusts, or vulture funds, to basically take over the rental market, which has turned renting into a sleek and streamlined capitalistic dream. This, in turn, pushes house prices up as those very funds compete and bid against ordinary people just trying to buy a home. They buy up what they can, then let those properties sit idle for a little bit to drum up more demand for rentals and slowly release them back into the rental market at eye-watering rents. Supply and demand, eh? So your choices are to either rent at extortionate rates, artificially inflated by vulture funds sitting on properties, or try to buy, which means bidding wars against these vulture funds and even local councils. Average working class people are being pushed to the limits, all because of housing. And who makes up the brunt of the working class? That's right, millennials. Because as of right now, millennials make up a slight majority over Generation X as the largest segment of the workforce. And obviously, that's going to grow over time. And since millennials started their journey into adult life just as the biggest recession in generations hit, yeah, it affects us more than Gen X. Now, that's not me saying that all of Gen X are financially fine, by the way, but far more of them are than Generation Y, that's for sure. So how does this housing crisis affect millennials and our outlook on life compared to older generations? Well, as I said before, housing is a basic human need. It's not supposed to be a luxury one can aspire to, it's meant to be a basic part of your life. And with rents and house prices skyrocketing, many millennials are being left behind. Having a stable roof over your head is key to feeling secure in your life. And if you don't have that security, then how can you plan for anything else in life? More and more millennials are experiencing the big milestones in life later and later. Marriage is being postponed because couples don't want to get married, only have to remain living separately with their parents while they try their best to find somewhere independent to live. Couples who have married and are renting or manage buying a small apartment are putting off having children until they can have a more secure home. Millennials are effectively putting their lives on hold until the housing market gets fixed. Those who do plough ahead with those milestones are doing so in the blind hope that something, anything, will change that will make their lives easier. I mean, I should know, I'm one of them, renting a 2-bedroom apartment with my husband and only child. An only child not because we don't want more children, but because we have no space for another child and nowhere to move to in our hometown to allow us to grow our family. Even if you were lucky enough to find a suitable rental property here in Ireland to live in, the security, it just isn't there. Now, landlords will say that renters in Ireland are very well protected, and I can see their point to a point. But there are enough loopholes to evict tenants that negate that security. The protections afforded to renters, really, they just ensure that everything is done by the book, so that if you're told to leave, that you get the correct amount of notice and are notified of same in the correct manner. Unfortunately, though, it still means that in a few months' time, you're going to be homeless. Unlike on the continent, we don't have long-term leases here in Ireland. We don't have the ability to decorate a rental unit as we like. It's rare to find a property that comes unfurnished. So that rental property never really feels like your home. And because of that, the security never really appears. Renting in Ireland is not suitable for long-term tenancies unless you are incredibly lucky. So the vast majority of people would rather buy a home and the security that brings. But again, millennials can't afford this either. House prices here in Ireland are nearing or have reached in certain areas the prices at the height of the Celtic Tiger boom. But they've reached them without the credit. So mortgages are increasingly hard to come by. Without the security of a home, our generation, well, we've become hopeless. And that hopelessness leads to a whole host of other problems like apathy that are often mistaken for laziness. Apathy is not laziness, but if you have no real goals to work towards, is it any wonder millennials think, what's the point? Now, older generations would like to believe that millennials struggle to get mortgages or to pay rent because we are lazy or because we waste our money on luxuries that we don't need. We have been told to cut out the avocado on toast and the takeaway coffees, and that if we do that, we'll be golden. But obviously, this is just plain wrong. Unfortunately, boomers and Gen X don't want to hear different though. It's easier to blame millennials for not being able to buy or rent a suitable home on our own indulgences rather than admit that the policies of the older generations who, by and large make up the ruling political class, have failed us, have failed millennials. We often hear that millennials want instant gratification and that we don't want to work for anything, instead just wanting things to be handed to us. Again though, this couldn't be further from the truth. The vast majority of millennials would be very happy to put the hard work in if it meant being able to own a home in a few short years. Just like the older generations were able to. My parents, for example, were able to buy a house in a few short years of working extra shifts and saving every penny they could. They did not have what would be considered good jobs by today's standards, and yet they were able to achieve their goals in a very short period of time. Sure, they had help from the government in the form of tax breaks and incentives, but they were still actually able to work hard and buy their own home. Before that, people were even able to buy and maintain a home and have multiple children on one income. Now, single people are effectively priced out of the market because a single income is useless for a mortgage. Now, there are no real overtime shifts available to people because most millennials have salaried work. Now, people can barely afford 1 or 2 children, never mind the 6+ children that were common only a couple of generations ago. Millennials were told the best path to a good life was to go to college, put the work in, get a decent job based off your degree, and hey presto, life will be good. You'll be able to buy a nice house and have a second car and have foreign holidays. But we can't. We can't because wages aren't keeping up with house prices. We were lied to. So no, we don't want instant gratification, but we do want to see the fruits of scrimping and saving at some stage in the not too distant future, and that just isn't happening. We would be perfectly happy to knuckle down, cut out frivolous spending, and save hard to grind out that deposit if it actually meant we'd be making progress towards buying a home. But when the savings fund becomes more and more like a black hole that will never be full enough, then what's the point? Why bother? Why not use what little extra money you have after paying your rent to go travelling while you're young enough to truly enjoy it? Or why not just buy that fancy car you've always wanted? Or indulge in your hobbies and nights out because, what else would you be spending your money on? You certainly won't be spending it on a house, that's for sure. Not when every step forward you take in savings, house prices take a giant running leap. And it's this behaviour that has led older generations to consider us lazy, entitled and irresponsible, when really, it's just that most of our generation has almost given up. Giving up and hopelessness is not laziness. It's the sad conclusion of having nothing to work towards. All millennials want is the ability to do what previous generations could. We want to know that if we put the work in, it will be rewarded, because right now that is not the case. In so many ways, that's not the case. The goalposts keep moving. The target is never still. We are constantly let down by those in power who have the means to change things. The housing issue that millennials face, I feel, is a major reason behind the other issues millennials face. Mental health is something that more and more of my age group struggle with, and it's not hard to see why. Many millennials either have to house share or move back in with their parents, and that is not an easy thing to do. House shares have a place, absolutely, but not when you're in your late 20s or early 30s and you need your own space. The same with living at home. Why have we as a society regressed in that way? Unless there were medical reasons behind it, an adult still living with their parents would have been looked at as some sort of a failure in the past. Now, it's nearly the norm, but the stigma remains, and not because people are mocking those in that situation or anything ridiculously immature like that. No, the stigma remains because those adults living in house shares or back at home with mum and dad feel like they shouldn't have to do this, that they should be able to afford a basic necessity, and yet they can't. In fact, one of our leading politicians, Leo Varadkar, he's now our Taoiseach or Deputy Prime Minister, but he was our Taoiseach or Prime Minister at the time he made these comments. He actually expects anyone who wants to buy a house to move back home with mum and dad to save, or borrow from the bank of mammy and daddy to pay for the deposit. Because, that's easier than him admitting that his policies have helped to cause the chaos we're in right now. I mean, the fact that not everyone has parents to fall back on doesn't even seem to register in his mind. It's either use your parents, and if you can't, well, tough shit, I guess. In short, more and more millennials are made to feel like failures when it's really the system that has failed them. A system that has regressed so spectacularly that even bigger problems await down the tracks like the impending pension bomb. And we are gaslit into believing that we are the problem by the older generations who were the ones who caused the issues we're facing. Housing could be fixed if the will was there, but there is far too much of an I'm all right, Jack attitude from both the older generations and those in power. Too much of a have and have-nots approach. Us millennials can see the truth. Older generations and most Irish politicians are landlords themselves. They don't want us buying houses because then they can't gouge us with ridiculous rents. And yet we are still blamed and spoken about as if we are the ones failing. Add all of this up, and is it any wonder millennials complain? Is it any wonder millennials struggle so much with mental health issues when the future looks so bleak for so many? Is it really okay to just dismiss these concerns as nothing when there's next to nothing a millennial can do to counter them? And honestly, I genuinely worry for Gen Z. As bad as we have it, they may end up even worse if we can't solve these issues. Housing is the huge elephant in the room, and until we sort it out, all the other issues facing millennials will just be exacerbated no end. Housing security is one of the most important things a person needs, and if you cannot be secure in your own home, what chance do you have of feeling secure in any other part of your life? Unfortunately, housing is not the only area in life where millennials are being let down time and time again. Job security and career progression is a big problem area. Healthcare, and especially mental health care, is another huge issue. I will talk more about these issues in future episodes in this series, but believe me, housing has an impact on all of them. We need to start demanding the change from our political class that will help us create a society that we can actually live in and not just survive in. Because right now, most of us are just surviving, just living paycheck to paycheck because we can't afford much else. Affordable housing is the first step, but more needs to be done to allow the following generations an easier time at everything. And after all, isn't that what's important? I want my children to have it easier than me. I don't want them to struggle. I want life to get better for all of us. And changing housing from a commercial enterprise to a basic need that's actually affordable is a good place to start. And it's something we should be protesting about and demanding change from those with the power to change it. Too often we get bogged down by other issues that seem really important, but actually have very little impact on our daily lives. And I'd wager that's by design. Deflect and divert. But housing is a huge issue and one that needs to be tackled. We cannot accept any less from our political classes. We need less of the I'm all right, Jack approach from the upper classes, older generations and politicians, and more equity and affordability for all. We need real change, or all that will be left is huge swathes of disenfranchised people the world over. Millennials are in the middle of this crisis now, but Gen Z is not far behind. We need to change our approach to housing, and we need to do it now. To anyone who has gotten this far, thank you for listening to me ramble on, and I hope some of what I've said explains the millennial outlook somewhat. or at the very least my outlook anyway. So let me know in the comments what you think. Did you agree or disagree? Have you other experiences that mean you have a different outlook on all of this? I would love to hear it. Only by listening and trying to understand others' viewpoints can we really make progress as a society. So I do look forward to hearing opinions that challenge my outlook. Are there any millennials out there who feel maybe I'm not talking about them? Maybe some who've managed buying a home and actually felt it was easy enough? If so, I'd love to hear from you. Success stories are always needed to give others hope, so they would be very, very welcome. I wanted to start this channel in the hopes that maybe my views are useful or relatable to others, and to expand my mind, to give a voice to ordinary people like me who aren't experts in all the current affairs plaguing our lives, but who can see right from wrong and are sick of the way the world seems to be turning. For too long, I felt like I was just shouting at the clouds when getting frustrated at the daily news, and I hope to use this channel to help me explore those frustrations and to see if others feel like I do. To be honest, I used to be quite an optimistic person, but all the issues in the world have changed me into quite the cynic, a millennial cynic, if you will. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing for more from me. I want to discuss all sorts of issues that affect all walks of life, not just those that affect millennials. And on that note, my next episode will focus on the rising cost of living in a general sense and what, if anything, we can do to fix it. I also hope to see you in the next episode of this series, A Millennial Defense, where we can take a deeper look at careers, jobs and finances and how they affect millennials. So until next time, slán go fóill.